Hello there and welcome. This is Gina from McGuire. So glad you're here. Today I am sharing some new and simple ways to add foil to your cards. I will be demonstrating some foiling techniques using stencils and even one using stamps. And if foiling is not your jam, that's okay. I have some other ideas that I'll share along the way. Now I'm using some new products from Gina Designs, but I'm also using some old ones. So I'll mix those together to create several cards today. Gina is known for her products that make foiling very simple, and she has a new one. It is the Fuse Foiling Gel. I'll demo with this today, showing how to use it with and without foil. And throughout the video, I will be using the Gina Fuse Foiling System. That's the machine that you see there. However, you don't need it for all of the techniques. If you have a different kind of foiling system, that would work also, or you could even try a laminator. As for foils, Gina has had the most beautiful fancy foils that work with this type system for many years now. Well, now she has some new colors, which I'm really excited about, so I'll be using a few of these today. These foils work with like printed toner sheets or poly glaze or the gel I'm using today. I have many videos showing about these foils. I will link to one up here on the top right and in my description below. So some of the new colors that are available are the Emerald Coast, the Black Onyx. Next up is the Sunkissed Coral, which matches her new ink and cardstock colors, along with Butterscotch and this Blue Sky. Then we have Red Hot, that matches one of her older colors, along with Tangerine Twist. Then we have Lemon Drop, and notice some of these are very shiny and some have a little bit more of a pearl look, like this Fresh Asparagus and also the Dusty Rose. So you can see how these are just a little bit different in how much shine there is, but they definitely all give a beautiful foil shine. So there we have the Dusty Rose and then the Amethyst. Keep in mind, Gina has lots of other colors available that have been out for a couple years. These are just the new ones, and I'll focus on these today. Now, before we get into card making, I thought I would demonstrate that new transfer gel along with one of these foils. I have this older Gina water droplet stencil, and I'm putting it onto white cardstock. Any cardstock would work. I also am using magnets to hold it in place as I apply the gel on top. I like to use a little palette knife like this one. This one's from Simon Hurley, and I just spread a thin layer of this on. It is a great consistency. It's kind of like mayonnaise, so it spreads beautifully. And I'm just putting a random amount down here. I'm not trying to cover the whole stencil. Once I'm done, I take the scraper from Simon Hurley and I smooth it all out, put the excess back in the jar, and then I go and wash my stencil immediately in the sink. You want to get that product off before it dries. Now this product, this gel, goes on white, but it dries clear. So you know it's dry when it becomes clear. So I set that aside and let it dry for a bit. And now we can foil onto that gel. The nice thing about this gel is it isn't sticky when it dries. So you could just leave it as a shine, which I'll demonstrate later, or you can lay the foil on top of it, run it through your fuse machine, and it'll fuse on there. Let me just show you here. You can see that it is clear and shiny, so you could leave it like this if you wanted. And I'll show that later on. But I'm putting the foil on top, putting it into the folded clear carrier sheet that comes with the fuse, and feeding it through the fuse machine on the 3 setting. This will give us some heat and pressure. When it comes out, I can peel it off and look at that beautiful, beautiful foil shine. Very easy to do. And this allows us to do foiling with our stencils. There are other things you can do with this gel besides with stencils. I'll demonstrate some of those later and in future videos. By the way, there's another fun thing you can do with this. After it's done, you can heat it up with a heat gun, and that causes it to kind of bubble, and it changes the shine or the finish of the foil. So you can get it looks like it was a leafing technique. It's really unique. And so I'm going to heat up half of this so you can see a comparison. On the left is the super smooth, where I didn't heat it up. On the right is where I heated it with the heat gun, kind of reactivating that gel. And look at that fun texture that you get. I will do cards with both versions in today's video. Now that's just a quick basic demo of this gel. Again, many more things you can do, but I wanted to show you that before we got started. Now let's create some cards. Now all of my cards today use the Sending Flowers card kit from Gina K Designs. This is a new one. Later on, these products will be available separately. However, the value of the kit is outstanding, so it's worth considering. Now in this kit, there's a large 6x8 stamp set along with the coordinating dies for it that cut out even those small sentiments. There's a 4x6 stamp set with coordinating dies and coordinating stencils. Then there are 2 floral layering stencil sets. I'll be using both of them today. Her layering stencil sets are so much fun and easy to use. And then this month there is a free bonus gift of a new sticky mat. So all of this is included in that card kit. Now this is the 4x6 stamp set in that kit and the coloring stencils and dies. I did want to mention that sold separately are poly glaze sheets. These you can foil in the same way that I'm foiling with the gel today. I will demo foiling with this later on. These coordinate with those dies and the stamp set perfectly. I will use the poly glaze today for a sentiment that I'll add on one of my cards. So you'll see me demonstrate that later. I also wanted to show you this is the 6x8 stamp set that comes in that card kit. I will be using that kind of block looking image on the left, but I also wanted to show you that all of those little sentiments have dies to go with them. I will be using the sentiments and dies on a couple of my cards today also. And here is a look at one of the layering stencil sets in the kit. This is the Shimmering Roses. You can see that these kind of build together to create a really nice rose that's kind of focal point on your card and also some little accents around it. So it's not really a layering stencil set, but instead builds a floral image. And then we have the Hydrangea layering stencil sets. This one has a lot of detail to those flowers, and it's going to be really fun for a couple of foil examples today. I know I'm going to get a lot of questions about that sticky mat. I'm not using it in today's video, but this fits nicely inside of your MISTI and it's got that nice stick to it. I like that Gina put those guidelines there so you can center things up, and she even put the measurements on the bottom, which is really helpful. So I'll be sure to use that in a future video. There is one stamp set that I'll be using today that isn't in the kit. That's the Trust the Magic. There is a stamp set and coordinating die set, and I'll be using that large image later in this video. So I just wanted to show you all the products I'm using, get that out of the way. Now let's dive in. So I have my MISTI stamping tool and I have my Gina K grip mat inside of it. I'm putting down a piece of white cardstock, and I'll start with the Hydrangea layering stencil. So I'm putting down the first layer of the flowers, and I'm applying the Gina K Blue Sky ink. I am in love with this color. I keep using it a lot. Gina recently came out with 4 new colors: Blue Sky, Butterscotch, Emerald Coast, and Sunkissed Coral. And I think I'm using all of them today. So here I have a Gina K brush, and I'm just quickly applying the Blue Sky over that stencil opening. I am putting the ink a little bit heavier at the base of the flower and a little lighter towards the tips. But the nice thing about Gina's inks is they have like a self-blending agent in it. So you don't have to spend a lot of time getting a beautiful blend. It'll dry and blend on its own. Here I've got the second stencil on. This adds the details on the flowers, and I'm putting a heavy amount of that same color. Then we have the third stencil, which does the leaves. Over this, I'll apply a quick layer of the Lucky Clover Green, which is a beautiful green. Then I'll come in with Christmas Pine and add that darker color kind of at the base of the leaves and right below the base of the flowers. So this is what the layering stencils look like just with ink. I think that's such a beautiful look, but I'm going to add some foiling to that. So we'll take the stencil that adds the details on the flowers. I'll place that on top, and then I will apply a layer of the foiling gel. I didn't have to ink under that, by the way. I chose to just so you could see what it looked like with just ink. So I'm putting a layer of the foiling gel on top using my palette knife, trying to smooth it out the best that I can. I will then put the excess gel back into the jar, close it up tight. Then I will take my stencil to the sink and clean it right away with some water and mild soap. Now here you can see that it goes on white, so all of that gel is kind of white there. But when it dries, you can see what it looks like here. It's clear and it gives it a shine. So you could leave this as is and you just have that nice shine on top of it. But I'm going to add the foil. So I'm taking a piece of blue foil, putting on top, making sure to cover all of that exposed gel, putting it into the carrier sheet, feeding it through my fuse machine at a 3 setting, peeling it off, and look at that beautiful foil now that we have on those flowers. So you could leave it without the foil and you get a clear shine, or you can add the foil and you get that beautiful color foil shine. All right, now I thought it'd be fun to kind of step up this background. So I have an older stamp from Gina K. This is the Elegant Script. She's had this one for a long time and I reach for it often. You can tell it's been well loved. Now I'm inking that up with the Blue Sky ink. Sorry, my head gets in the way there. Pressing that down firmly, and this just gives us a script over the whole image. Now it does stamp over the green and the light blue, but that's okay. I think it looks really cool that way. The foil will resist that ink. Now for a sentiment, I used an older die set from Gina K Designs. This is the Master Layouts 9 die set. It has these basic dies that can be used for so many things, but I also really like the word friend and the shadow die that's included. So I'm using that on several of my cards today. I reach for it often. So here is the completed card. I trimmed our background down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card that I made from Gina K Blue Sky cardstock. The friend I did from blue denim cardstock and added it on a white shadow. And I used blue denim ink to stamp You Make Me Happy. That's from the stamp set that's in the kit, and I used the coordinating die to cut it out. So here you can see how you can add detail to layering stencils by foiling one of the layers. I'll come back to that layering stencil later on, but let's next move on to the other layering stencil, the Shimmering Roses. That's part of that kit, just so I can demonstrate more techniques and also show you what this looks like. So I have the leaves that I'm doing first. I'm not sure why I started with it. You'll notice there was still ink on there from the last time I used this off screen. Instead of wiping it off, I left it on there and I'm just kind of mixing it in with the green inks that I'm adding. Sometimes it's best to just use that leftover ink instead of wiping it off. So this is a mix of fresh asparagus, let's see, there's a bit of lucky clover and even a bit of Christmas pine. So don't be afraid to mix your different colors. In fact, look how pretty that turned out. Now for the first layer or part of the flowers, I used a bit of peach Bellini and then I added a bit of the slightly darker Sunkissed coral to the center. And for the second part of the flowers, I used the Sunkissed coral. This is a beautiful coral color. Again, it's one of her 4 newest colors that I love so much. And then for the fourth stencil, which adds little doodads around your flower cluster, I'm using the other new color, Butterscotch. This is a nice, not so bright yellow that I think I'll reach for often when doing florals. And look how beautiful the results are just with ink. However, we're going to add some foil and other things to this. So I'm putting down one of the flower stencils from the set and I'm applying the foiling gel right on top. This time, instead of using a palette knife to get a nice thick layer, I am using a Tim Holtz mini ink blending tool with a foam applicator, and I'm just pouncing a thin layer down over the stencil. By pouncing, you'll end up with a little bit of texture to it, and because it's a thinner layer, it doesn't take as long to dry. So let me show you, this is after it dries. You can see that bit of shiny texture on those darker petals. It's really pretty. But I decided I want to foil this, so I'm putting a piece of Sunkissed foil on top and running it through my fuse machine. Now you always want to make sure your gel is dry when you're doing your foiling. So let's peel that off and look at, you can kind of see the texture on that foil because I did that pouncing motion. So it has a little texture and shine to it. Whereas this one from earlier was very smooth shine because I did that smooth layer. So there's a little comparison on the foil between the two different ways of applying it. Now I did decide for the leaves to go and put a thick layer of the gel, but I'm not going to foil this. I'm just going to let it dry, and this will give my leaves some shine. Now when I take off the stencil, you'll see that the gel is white, so I know it's wet. When it becomes very clear, I know it's dry. Here you can see it's dry and clear. Now the cool thing is on this, I have foil on some of my petals, and then my leaves have that clear gel on top. It's not sticky, it's just clear and shiny. So I can put ink on top of those leaves and it will resist this peach Bellini ink. So I'm getting like a halo of color around my images here. I don't care if the peach gets on the peach flowers I did, but I didn't want to turn my green leaves peach. But because I put the clear gel on top, it'll protect that green ink underneath and it won't allow that color to get to it. The clear gel is resisting that peach ink on top. And the leaves have that beautiful shine to it. So I trimmed my background down and matted it with a thin mat of Sunkissed coral cardstock and added it to a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And where the little stencil doodads were, I ended up putting little gold gems on top to match the gold Friends sentiment I have in the center from that Master Layouts 9 die set. Here you can see the foil on the flowers and the shine on the green leaves, and then that little halo of peach Bellini ink that we have over the whole focal point. So this shows you can also use that gel as a resist, and you can do texture with that gel. Okay, let's move on to another stencil example, changing things up a bit. And I have also something to share with you that doesn't involve the gel. So I have blue sky cardstock and I'm inking over the first layer of the flowers with the blue sky ink. I then added a little bit of the blue raspberry ink towards the base of these flowers, just for that look of dimension. So after I ink those up, I'm going to remove that stencil and clean it. Then I thought I would take that block stamp from the kit that I showed you earlier. It's got like a linen texture to it. And I wanted to try to stamp that over the openings. And as you know, if you've ever tried to stamp over a stencil, it can be tricky because the lip of the stencil doesn't actually let the stamp completely touch the cardstock. But I was determined. So I have a Gina K white pigment ink here, and I'm going to try to stamp over the stencil. It's easier if the openings are bigger to stamp over a stencil. This one, it didn't want to stamp over it. You could see that the white ink wasn't really reaching the blue ink below it. So I was thinking here, and I decided to try stamping it on its own. Take the stamp and just press it in, because the stamp is flexible, right? And I thought if I laid the stamp directly over the stencil and then pressed with my fingers over that flexible stamp, that I could actually get the stamp to reach inside of the holes of the stencil. And believe it or not, it worked pretty well because I could really press that down. But it was kind of frustrating because the stamp wanted to stick to my fingers also, because as you know, stamps have that little bit of stick to them. So what I decided to do was take a piece of clear packaging, something that I recycled, stick that on the back of the stamp, and that way I could really press that stamp down. So when the stamp is on an acrylic block or the door of your MISTI, you can't take advantage of the fact that the stamp is flexible and really get into those nooks and crannies. So this is definitely something that I will be doing again in the future. After I add other things to these flowers, I'm going to cover up most of this bit of texture that I'm putting, or stamp texture that I'm putting on top of these flowers, but I was glad to figure out how to do this, and I thought I'd share it with you. So after I did this over each of the flowers, you can see here that white, like linen looking texture that we stamped on top of the flowers, and I thought that looked really cool. But again, I'm going to end up covering up quite a bit of it. You will definitely see me explore this technique in later videos, but I thought I'd include it today. All right, so I heat set that white ink so it's dry, and now I'll put on the second layer of that floral stencil, and I'm putting the gel over this, and I'm putting the thicker layer of gel by using the palette knife. I could have done a thinner layer by using like a sponge applicator. By the way, that sponge applicator, once it dries, you can't reuse it again, so keep that in mind. All right, so now you could see that was white. Once it dries, it becomes clear. So you can see it's clear here. I'm putting the foil on top and then running that through my fuse machine. By the way, I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a fuse machine, you can try this with other laminating or foiling systems. This gel works really well, as do the foils, so you should have no trouble. And there you can see the blue foil details on those flowers. Next up, I'm going to come in with white pigment ink over my stencil. The reason I'm putting white pigment ink down first is this puts a white base on that blue cardstock for me to put green ink on top of. So I'll put the white ink over all the openings, and then you want to heat set it completely. I also decided to heat set the foil, and that gives it that textured look. Remember how I demoed that at the beginning of this video? If you heat set your gel and foil after doing the foiling, it gives that foil, it looks like you did a leafing technique instead of smooth foil. All right, once all of that is dry, I'll clean my stencil, put it back on top, and I'll use a green dye ink on top of it. So the white base of that ink helps this green ink be a more true green on the blue cardstock instead of green on blue cardstock directly, which would change the color a bit. When I ink over a white pigment ink, I like to take my dye ink pad and press it onto my glass work surface and pick up the ink from there. That way, if I accidentally get any white pigment ink on my brush, I'm not putting that onto my ink pad directly. So look at that beautiful result and that foil that we changed to have that texture. By the way, here's a comparison between the smooth foil on the left and when you heat set the foil afterwards on the right. I love how you can get both looks from the same products. By the way, in case I got a little white pigment ink on that brush, what I do is one quick spray of rubbing alcohol on my desk. I just dab my brush in there very lightly, not much rubbing alcohol on it, just a little bit, and then rub it off onto a dry cloth. And that gives it a nice clean. I don't do that often, but it is helpful. Now let's go back to the project and put that leaf stencil back in place. I have a sponge applicator and I am pouncing a pretty thick amount of the foiling gel on top. So I'm pouncing it because that gives it a texture. I could kind of smooth it around, but I want like a thick texture on here, not super thick, but a bit more than I did before. And this will give us some texture and shine to our leaves. So you can see the texture there. It's white because it's wet, but when it dries, it becomes clear and it almost looks like a crackle paste. It's really cool. And again, that dries non-sticky, so you can just leave it as is. There's a lot to look at this card. So you see the white stamping that I did on the flower petals. Some of it is still showing. Then you see the textured foil that we did by kind of adding that heat to it afterwards. Then you see the shiny texture that we have on our leaves by using the foiling gel without any foil. And again, I used the Friend dies from the Master Layouts 9 set and stamped a little sentiment to put underneath it. So there are a few ways you can use the gel with the stencil. Next, I thought I'd show you how you can stamp with the gel. Now, this isn't a perfect technique and it may not be for everyone, but I did decide to include it. There are also a few ways to do this, but this is what I found worked best. I use my Tim Holtz ink blending tool, so this has a foam on it. I get a little bit of the foiling gel on the foam and I lightly pounce it onto the surface of a stamp. I'm using the large floral stamp that I showed you earlier in this video. So I'm putting a quick layer down. You want to do this quickly because you don't want it to dry. Then stamp it onto your paper as you would a normal stamp. You could repeat the process if you want to, but make sure you're not putting so much gel on it that you get little blobs of gel in places. All right, so now I will take that, let that dry, and I will immediately go clean my stamp. So what I do is I take it to the sink, I use some gentle soap and water and it will come off. You could also use a stamp cleaner. You do want to make sure that you clean that gel off before it dries. Another thing you could do is use a cling stamp, like a rubber stamp instead. That would be easier to clean. If you're not comfortable using the gel on your stamp, by all means, you can skip trying this technique. I found I had no trouble with it. Now I did give that a little bit of time to dry, but there's not much gel there, so it dries pretty quickly. I'm taking a piece of Emerald Coast foil, putting it on top and running it through my fuse, again at that setting of 3. And this will give us a foiled stamp image. Now it's not going to be perfect. It really depends on how well you applied that gel, but I think it gives a really cool result. So I will be testing this with other stamps in the future. I think the smaller the stamp, the better, because you can quickly apply the gel and go ahead and quickly stamp it. I did a pretty big image, which isn't as forgiving, but it worked great. And the leftover foil, I can save that to use with a sheet of plain polyglaze later on, and I can have a reverse foil image. Now I added a bit of the matching Emerald Coast ink to that, and then a little bit of tropical teal here and there. I'm only using a part of this image, so that's why I didn't ink all of it. Now this isn't going to look fantastic, but that's okay, because I plan to give this a bit of water, so I spritzed it a few times with water, and that kind of gives it more of a watercolor look. While that's drying, I'll give you a look at the new Master Layouts die set from Gina K. This is number 18. These are die sets with useful dies that can be used over and over for many things. This has several different banners with faux stitching and shadow dies, which I think are fun. You can see there are some decorative borders and a circle also. But honestly, my favorite thing in this set is the large faux stitch frame. So I'm going to use that on this card. You can see there's faux stitching on the inside edge, so it cuts that frame. Then there is the faux stitching on the inside of the die, so you get that rectangle with the faux stitching. Then there's a solid rectangle that cuts a really tight mat for the stitched rectangle, so you can see how this layers together nicely. So I like that these can be used in many different ways. What I chose to use today is the frame alone, and I die cut that 4 times from white cardstock and glued it together so that it has some dimension. And I'll glue that right on top of my foiled image that now is completely dry. I'll put something heavy on it while the glue dries, and let's work on our sentiment. Here's the polyglaze that I showed you earlier that coordinates with the stamp set in the kit and the die set in the kit and the stencils in the kit. I'm just using the sentiments in here. I like that there are many included. I cut out "You Are" and "In My Thoughts." This is polyglaze. Anywhere you see that light gray printing and then you put foil on top, it'll foil. I've done a video all about polyglaze. I'll link to it up in the top right so you can learn more about it. I used the black Onyx foil, and look at that smooth shine that you get with lots of detail. And of course, I'll use the coordinating dies to cut those out. Now, I just wanted to mention that Gina now comes out with polyglaze that's available separately, and it coordinates with a lot of her stamp sets, so that if you prefer to get a foiled image, a really nice foiled image, you could use a polyglaze and then use the coordinating die to cut it out. And that coordinating die would work with either the stamp or the polyglaze. And I like that you have those options. So I finished up this card off screen. On the card base, I put a piece of sea glass cardstock, and I stamped that elegant script background stamp with the Emerald Coast ink. I also added my foiled piece right there in the center. You can see that shine. And then our little polyglaze foil sentiments. I put the "You Are" at a bit of an angle just for some added interest. So there it shows you can use the foiling gel to do stamping if that's something you're looking to do. All right, there's just a quick look at the new foiling gel from Gina K Designs. I will be using this in future videos, but this will get us started. If you're interested in any of the products I used today, they are linked below in my YouTube description. You can also check out the related videos that I mentioned in this one here at the end.